when we think about the conventional retirement, we guys seem to be speaking that language. Whereas people have moved on since the great financial crisis of 2008 to say it's defined contribution, which means that you put money aside. The government's not going to guarantee returns on it, barring a few products, but you're responsible for what you will do with your money for your old age. I think that's the shift one needs to know, that there is no longer defined pensions that you're going to get from your companies. It is your responsibility to think of your finances for future. And therefore, I would say, just as you mentioned a little while earlier, retirement is just retiring from your primary job. You would ideally like to continue working at your passions, at things you love. And when you work on things you love, really there is no retiring in that, right? And I think that's the key.
Folks, welcome to Paisa Vaisa. I'm your host Anupam Gupta, B50 on Twitter. And on today's episode, I'm talking of a really different topic, but with a normal guest. Mutual fund guest. The topic is never retire. My returning guest, Ajit, Menon, CEO, PGIM India Mutual Fund. He's going to tell you about 50 gigs, not gigabytes, 50 gigs. Freelance stuff that you can do to help you achieve financial independence later in life or even earlier in life. We're going to talk about all of that. Ajit, welcome back for the third time on Paisa Vaisa. You were here first online back in November 2020.
That's right. I remember that.
When studios were not open, and of course we were doing all that stuff. I'm just so glad it's over. Then of course you were here last year in December 2023. We were on another floor, and here we are again. It's great to have you back.
My pleasure.
Welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for doing this for our listeners. Okay, so let's first do a recap on PGIM India Mutual Fund. What have you guys been up to? How's the journey been so far, and how's it going?
Well, thank you, Anupam, again for having me on the show. For PGIM, it's been a fantastic journey over the last 5 years. We were born, so to speak, as PGIM, reborn, I could say, as PGIM in 2019. And, we are somewhere managing now assets close to 30,000 crores, which includes not just mutual funds, but our advisory, PMS, AIF assets as well. Early 2020, when we started this journey, just before the lockdowns, we were roughly around 3,500 crores with about 800-900 crores in equity. So it's been a great journey. We've sort of transformed as an equity fund house. We've seen many changes in markets and people along the way. For us as a company, one change that did happen recently in 23 was manager change, in the sense that Anirudh Naha, who was our head of equity, he moved on to become the CIO for our alternates business when we launched our AIF business. And we brought in Vinay Paharia, who was at that time the CIO for Union Mutual Fund. So he's now our CIO. So he heads up the mutual fund piece with our senior fund managers, Vivek Ananda and Utsav. So that change has happened at a time also when markets have been in some huge transformative stage in itself. So we've been struggling through all of that, but we are in a happy place right now. I think we have a lot under control, and we are really eagerly looking forward to the next journey.
Yeah, you're one of the guests where I can actually talk about the mutual fund stuff later because you've got so much interesting to talk about out here. Yes. I remember last year when you were here, you were talking about the PGIM India Mutual Fund's Retirement Readiness Survey. Okay.
That's right.
Can we just start from there, maybe for people who did not hear that episode? And folks, if you want to hear that episode, 18 December 2023, please go, have a look, have a listen. It's there. Just a general recap before we go into...
Sure, Anupam. So retirement has been a passion subject for me and for the firm, including our global mothership, PGIM. We think and talk retirement quite a bit. So we do the survey once in 2 years. We did the first one release in 2020, the other in 2023. Just to hit quickly on some of the statistics that we found. In the earlier one, we found that about 49% of Indians were saying that they were reasonably retirement ready. And since we did the 23, which was post-COVID, we found that 67% of people were now saying that they were retirement ready, which was a great sort of move up. I think people were thinking about the long term, which is a good thing to have. And when we dug into the numbers, however, Anupam, we also found that when people were taking insurance for themselves, it counted as taking care of your future. So for people, for instance, who were looking for advice for retirement, more than 2/3 of people were talking to insurance agents for that advice. And that sort of qualified them to be sort of retirement ready, which I think is something to sort of think about, because I think retirement requires a lot more to sort of do. But I would think that the positive aspect of what we saw in the 2023 survey was that people were saying that when it comes to retirement or financial responsibilities, it's a responsibility, it's a commitment to my family. And they were wanting to be judged by society as saying, am I capable and competent enough to take care of my family? In the 2023 survey, for the first time, we saw people saying, what about me? Right? Something could have happened to me during COVID as well. What about my dreams and my aspirations? So the aspect of self-identity seemed to have sort of risen between those two surveys. And we can see that in the numbers in terms of the household savings and allocation of those savings as well. For the first time, we saw about 5% of savings going into learning and education and upskilling themselves. So that was one interesting aspect. People also, we found that about 36% of people were saying, you know what, we have a secondary source of income. And that secondary source of income need not necessarily be just from your financial assets. It need not be a rent coming from something you have or dividends coming from your investments. It was coming from a secondary skill.
Nice.
And I think that was what prompted the 50 gigs report that we will talk about shortly. But I think in general, these were, when you look at between 2020 and 23, we saw the aspect of self-identity sort of rise. We sort of looked at people in wanting to invest in themselves sort of rise. We also saw another strange one. We found that people in joint families were far more financially sort of less anxious, but that seemed to have reduced post-COVID. Naturally, I would assume that people who lived in joint families got affected much more because of being together. So I hope that that's temporary, because I'm all for large families and large friend circles. So I think those were some of the things that we saw between the two.
Let's set some context here, right? Because your report, folks, the report is open for public, so we'll carry it in the episode description to this episode, so you can download the report and have a look. Why will we? So you've covered about how people are doing this, right? That they're investing in a skill, they're investing in a talent, they're setting up a second stream of income. Let's take a step back and understand why they're doing it. And the data that you've quoted is quite surprising. Globally, life expectancy has increased by 6 years. Okay, this is a Lancet study, which is pretty much as authoritative as it comes. In India, it's increased by 8 years in the last 3 decades.
That's right.
In 30 years.
Right.
8 years, on average, obviously, have been added to, Indian population, to the Indian population. And it just blows my mind, So 8 years is a very long time.
It is.
Yeah, but here it is. Here we are. So is that why we need to add a stream of income? Because we know that we will retire from work.
Right.
We're going to retire from life.
That is true.
We're going to be very, very active physically, 8 years being added. We're going to be young. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, and I think you hit upon a very, very important point, Anupam, which is longevity. Everybody wants to live long, but most people are also anxious about what would be their, as Peter Attia calls it, health span rather than lifespan. And as medical science increases and people are living longer, financial anxiety goes alongside it. And I've always repeated this at PGIM, that retirement is the only financial goal of your life for which you don't get a conventional loan.
Okay, yeah.
See, most people focus on investing. They want to put money aside, for their kids' education comes first. And then, they will look at their marriage or buying a house. Car.
You get loans for all of that.
You get loans for all of that. The only financial goal for which you don't get a conventional loan is retirement. I mean, reverse mortgage and all are not products that have, taken off in India or as mature as it should be. So therefore, one needs to prioritize it. In the 2023 retirement survey of PGIM, we did see that retirement had climbed from 8th position to 6th position. So that's good. But I think coming back to longevity, I think the key is that what research seems to suggest is that if you retire from work and you're not doing anything, your mental abilities, because you don't have a purpose in life, starts reducing, and that immediately starts reflecting on your physical health. So you may have a honeymoon for a couple of years, and then it's about diabetes and hypertension and blood pressure and whatever else sort of follows. Doesn't have to be for everybody, but then it's a major risk. I think that's what one needs to appreciate. And therefore, being occupied and engaged for as long as you can is really the objective one should do. And if you can monetize that, why not?
This is amazing, right? Because you don't usually find CEOs of mutual funds talking about physical health and mental health, right?
Yeah.
And what you hit upon is so accurate. I don't think many people get this, that this loss of a sense of purpose because you have no work to do becomes like a spiral.
Right.
Okay. Now, Ajit, that's great for people like you and me who are of a certain age. Okay. I'm not passing any age jokes out here. But India's median age, I think, is some 20. It's some ridiculous number, 28 or 30 or whatever. It's what you call the demographic dividend. I know for a fact, data says that half of our population is born after 1995. Okay. People who are listening in or watching this, they are young. They are very young.
That's right.
Why should they even care? And your report talks about this exactly.
I think that they should care because they can expect to live to 100.
Wow.
And when you conventionally look at literature in media, all of us experts, we've been brought up in a different era. And that era essentially says that, look at your expenses, inflation adjusted to when you will stop working, and then you should have a corpus that is at least 25 to 30 years, because that's how long people lived, and that was good enough to live a little bit of legacy for your kids. But if you're going to live to 100 and beyond, then that's not going to be enough. And I have a feeling, Anupam, that for your listeners, they would be saying, you don't even have to tell us this, right? That's old world. We ourselves think that we will do multiple jobs all through our life.
That's a new
And I
word,
think compared to us, where we tend to stick to maybe one job for much longer, today's generation is like, well, if I don't like what I'm doing, I'm going to find something else to do and stay occupied. And that's a good trend, I think, in youngsters. It's just the monetary aspect of it, the financial aspect of it. How can you plan for that? And I think the conclusion that we are trying to draw in our report is that your biggest risk is the concentration risk of earning from just one skill. And therefore, if you want to be bulletproof, really, even if you live to 100, think about a second skill that you can monetize, that you can earn from, second or even a third, that you can monetize and earn from. I think that's the sort of underlying bottom line, I would say.
Define retirement here. I think that, maybe there's a disconnect in the way I used to look at retirement, or even my father used to look at retirement, and how my 16-year-old is going to look at retirement.
I think that when we hear the word retirement, and from where it comes from back in history, you had, after the Second World War and the sort of violence that the world went through, the deaths that the world saw, unions became extremely powerful. Governments became even more empathetic to employees and spoke of having pension after retirement, which meant that you would get maybe 50 or 70% of your last drawn pay till the end of your life, and then for your spouse. Unions negotiated for medical benefits for your spouse and your kids and things. So those were the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And when we think about the conventional retirement, we guys seem to be speaking that language, whereas people have moved on since the great financial crisis of 2008 to say it's defined contribution, which means that you put money aside. The government's not going to guarantee returns on it, barring a few products, but you're responsible for what you will do with your money for your old age. I think that's the shift one needs to know, that there is no longer defined pensions that you're going to get from your companies. It is your responsibility to think of your finances for future. And therefore, I would say, just as you mentioned a little while earlier, retirement is just retiring from your primary job. You would ideally like to continue working at your passions, at things you love. And when you work on things you love, really there is no retiring in that, right? And I think that's the key.
Yeah, the retirement word in a conventional sense would make sense to someone who's salaried.
That's right.
But if you're someone who's an entrepreneur or a business, you set your limits. You can keep on working till you can.
Correct.
Let me, look at this in a different way. That let's say that, you're at a social gathering or a party or a function or a get-together, whatever, with friends and family. And a 25-year-old comes and walks up to you, says, you're a CEO of PGIM. You've written this fancy report. I want to do FIRE. I want to, whatever. Financially independent, retire early, whatever it is. What would be like your 2 or 3 line advice to this young kid who's come to you?
Well, a couple of things. I would say to him or her that you can do it as long as you have multiple skills that you can monetize. So, speaking to youngsters, they'd say, listen, I don't want to work as much as my dad did or my granddad did. I want to backpack around the world, enjoy life. I may not settle down. How does it matter? I'd probably say, go to a course in mixology or a bartending course, figure out making 10 cocktails, backpack, go to the beaches of, Australia or Spain, tell the, local beach bar there that you can make 10 cocktails, earn the money for your next trip to the next location.
Wow.
And, you're not dipping into your savings there. You're using a skill to move forward.
Yeah.
And how difficult is that in today's world where you have these courses on, Coursera and Udemy, or you could go to the, bar associations that are available, which can teach you these courses, costing as low as 5,000 to say 50,000 if you had an investment, but you're getting a skill for life.
My kid, if he comes to you in these parties, now I'll kind of have a conversation with him after that, okay?
If I told him to do mixologist, become a mixologist.
So, but it's good advice, seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, if kids can identify with that and it's feasible.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to understand this. Your report also talks about financial planning.
That's right.
Okay, which is pretty important, and it also talks of an advisor, which obviously I'm assuming comes later in life. Just talk to us about financial planning, advisor. Why is it important?
Firstly, I have a financial advisor. I don't invest in stocks. I have a financial advisor, have had one for the last 15 years. Absolutely happy with the outcomes for my goals. And I think the answer to this is a little bit more in evolutionary science, so to speak, not to make it too complicated. It is just how human brains and human beings work. And when it's your money, you're so emotionally attached to it that you're very likely to take emotional decisions with your money when you invest. In today's world, for instance, it's like, okay, money's being made in the markets. I want to get rich quick. Or, I don't want to lose my money for sure. And if I lose my money, I'm not going to talk about it. That's also
Obviously,
true, right?
yeah.
And I think that's where an advisor sort of comes in. You have a doctor to take care of your health. You have a lawyer to take care of your assets.
Yeah.
You need a financial advisor to take care of your lifestyle. And if lifestyle is what your focus is, it's the advisor who will help you take the emotion out of trying to do it yourself and give you a plan that fits your profile. And that gives you a far higher probability, let me put it that way, gives you a far higher probability of hitting the goals that you want to hit with your money.
Folks, do think about that. Financial planning is very important. I mean, I know that we are in a market where it's very difficult to lose money in life, but that's actually why you should be doing planning, financial planning. Ajit, let's go to your report, okay?
Sure.
Yeah, it's great title. Renew, recharge, but never retire. Makes for a very good PPT also, by the way. Never retire. Okay, I know that we spoke about it for a bit in the first half where we spoke about how retire from work is different from retire from life. Let's just revisit this in context to renew and recharge and never retire. So what were you guys thinking when you put this title?
I think we were thinking about the conventional way that retirement has been always spoken about by our industry, which is that save, invest it to have that corpus for that day that you will step off the wheel, and then you do nothing because this money will last you for the rest of your life. And we are challenging that to say that has an implication on mental health and physical health, and really it's one, it's not even two. Mind and body is really one, and therefore we were saying that again, as you mentioned earlier in the first half, that it's really salaried people who sort of think about this. I think there's a lot of people out there who just don't want to go back to work, see their boss's face or whatever, and the overwhelming emotion is, I just want to finish this, right? But then I think the key question is, what after? And if you therefore don't think of lifespan, which is just your biological age of how long you live, but health span, as I was mentioning earlier, as Peter Attia would say, which is that how good is the quality of your life, even towards the end of your life, then I think what research suggests is that you need to have purpose. And you need to be physically active as much as you can with that purpose. And if it can allow you to do it by being involved in something that you love and you enjoy, that actually tells on your mind and body and improves your quality of life as well. And I think for some people who have the money, maybe they still need to do it by volunteering or working with NGOs where they may not be getting paid. But then for the young ones amongst us who's thinking about, hey, what if I live to 100? Will the money be enough? I think having multiple skills, things that they're passionate about, whether it's music, whether it's content creation, whether it's pets, whether it's voiceovers, and there's a ton of it that's in our report. I think what we were trying to say is that you can do it, you can monetize it. And also, I think what we were also trying to say is, and we've connected this later on our websites with a couple of calculators that help you do it, is that, there's a mental block to say, if I don't earn 3-5 lakhs a month, it's not going to be worth it. And we're saying you don't necessarily need to do that. If you're working towards a corpus, even if you don't hit it, having a secondary income which you can consistently put away can help you expand your portfolio quite a bit.
Now let's get into this. Okay, you've listed 50 gigs, part-time jobs, even businesses that anyone who's reading that can start after they've retired based on skills, experience and contacts. Help us understand this in depth, because this is something that covers all 50. You're saying that this is mota-moti what you need. Like, I know that it sounds very cool to have all these 50 careers, but you need something to get into it. Let's talk about that. Like, what are some essential things? Skills, experience, contacts?
Yeah, so I think if I were to give this as maybe as an example, for instance, let's say fitness is something that the young and most of us, almost all of us now, relate to quite a bit. To get certified as a yoga instructor from the Ayush Ministry, the whole cost of certification could be as low as $10,000 or a little under $10,000. Your ability to then start in your community and circle and even go online, and I'm sure there'll be many examples that people know during COVID and after, is to earn anywhere between 20,000 to 50,000 rupees a month. And I know people who are earning even higher than that by going online. That, I think, is the leverage. So one is to get certified for certain things that need the certification. So whether it's mixologist or a bartending course or a fitness instructor or becoming a yoga instructor. Say you wanted to be a trainer, a corporate trainer or an executive coach, for instance. There are certification courses you would need to do, which would require investments of somewhere around 1.5 lakh to 3 lakhs. Let's put it that way, depending on where you're going for it. My assessment and my team's assessment when we put the 50 gigs together is we saw that if you wanted to get certified in certain of these roles that you wanted to do, your investments could be as much as low as 10,000. And I think at the peak, we think it's about 3 lakhs.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
You want to start a cloud kitchen, you need equipment and stuff, maybe 2.5 lakhs. You want to get a certification, becoming an executive coach, maybe about 2 lakhs or so. And various other things. Some of the things would require some equipment that you would need to start with and things like that. So that's the skill, that's the sort of investment in the skill that I think you should do that builds on credibility. And then the second aspect is that you're doing all of this in the area that you are really, happy to work with. And I was just talking to a friend of mine who, has a little bit of land with his house, and they love pets and they get into pet grooming. Wow. And, they love pets, pet grooming, and pets are like kids, right? And so there's a good amount of earning that you can do getting into that space. People who may know multiple languages can get into translation as content is getting created online.
Voiceovers.
So voiceovers, for instance, you're absolutely right, and for content, and that can be done. So our approach is to in the report is one page for each of these 50 gigs telling you that if it requires a certification, where can you go to get that certification? How much would it cost? What kind of sort of investment that you might need to do in other peripheral stuff, and how much can you potentially earn? We've sort of interviewed sort of 20 to 25 odd people who are actually doing this in the report as well. Nice. So we have some testimonials from them, and we hope to get more testimonials.
I've seen that. There's a financial advisor is out there.
Yes.
So there's people who actually are doing this.
That's right. And and your audiences, many of them, once they read the report or listen to this podcast, they'll probably start thinking, hey, I know my neighbor or my friend who's or somebody I know that who's already doing this.
It's very interesting that you mentioned certification, right? So can you I want to emphasize one thing out here, that aside from the obvious romance and freedom and coolness of doing these things which are not the conventional areas, there is still a lot of hard work which is going to be required. Okay, because you would have done X thing throughout your 30 years of whatever, or even if you're someone who's young, you've worked 5 years, you've worked 10 years, and now one fine day, either out of choice or out of compulsion, now you're pushed towards doing 2 or 3 things, okay?
Mm.
Once that, that coolness is done, like I have my own hours, I can do whatever I want.
Mm-hmm.
There's about the hard work. This certification you mentioned also.
Right.
The certification is important for credibility.
Absolutely.
Like if you're reaching out to a client, and why should he take you seriously?
Absolutely.
Because here, I've studied for it, here are the hours, and here's my certification. So just emphasize for a bit about the hard work it takes to build your own brand. See, when you're in a company, it's all great. The company is investing in you, you've got an office, or you've got this.
Correct.
Now you're on your own.
Correct.
Just talk about, whether...
I don't know how to approach this, Anupam, because this point is important. But I would say that today, in a world of social media, there are lots of influencers in every field. And most of them have an opinion. And not to say that those opinions are wrong, but how do you build credibility if you want to, within that same space of being an influencer, how do you build your own credibility? That credibility will come because your listeners see that you're certified and you're speaking from a position of authority. Your experience, your education that leads you over there, rather than you're educated somewhere else and now you're giving opinion on something totally different. Yeah. And I also think that, and I think your audience will it'll resonate with it, which is that today's generation wants authenticity. Yeah, sure, they're listening to influencers, and I don't think one needs to blame them for it. They are making choices with influencers and whatever that may be. I hope that most of them are definitely doing their research to find out how authentic is that source. I think Generation Z, as we call it, or the new generation Alpha, they want authenticity, and if they are looking for authenticity, then your certifications are going to give you that credibility to, be in front of them.
I like that in each career you've defined the perks, what is required, what's the cost, what's the earning, what's the reward. So it's a nice structure that you've created, right? I mean, you've given the input, you've given the output. How long did this take? And what you said you had you interviewed 20-25 people.
Yeah, it is.
What is the process like?
Yeah, and Anupam, I must give credit for this to Udayan.
50 is not a small number. 50 is like one per week was kind of thing. Go on, sorry.
No. So this was a conversation that I had with Udayan, who's ex-Outlook Money and runs a firm called Fundu Money.
Okay.
And he was in office and we were chatting about this. It's a common subject of passion retirement. And I was telling him, Udayan, I need to do this. And he said, Ajit, this is a fantastic idea. Can I help you with this? And I said, please do. I need 100 gigs. He said, yeah, sure. We're going to go for it and you're going to find this. Because I said, when I try to Google it, you'll find 3, you'll find 5. You'll never find a good long list that you can get, and with all this sort of structured information. And Udayan and his team then went from Fundu Money, then went out, and then they came back in a month saying, Ajit, exhausting. I can't even get to 100, but we're going to go for 50. And that's how it all, started as a project between my marketing team and Udayan and his team at Fundu Money. And they came up with this 50 things. We sort of revised it between each of us, and we went back and forth, sort of put all the structures together. It took time. It's still not very easy. We're trying to now make short videos with many of these people who have given us the testimonials, so that we can put them on our websites for more people to see how they went through this journey, rather than just a short sort of testimonial. It took time.
Yeah, it would. Did this give you time to figure out what you want to do? I mean, I don't know.
Well, this has been something which is personally for me as well, a thought, because the subject is so much a passion that I want to try and follow it myself to know that I want to do this. And yes, I think that as I think of stepping off the wheel and, doing something, I get more attracted to things like becoming an executive coach, for instance. My wife is one of the earliest certified master coaches in India. She now certifies coaches. So I guess, I'm going to be a student and get certified from her so that I can approach, corporates by being an executive coach and mentor.
What a power couple that would be, huh?
Yeah, that's something.
2 coaches together. Okay. Now so folks, the report, we've given the link to the renew, recharge, but never retire report. 50 gigs, and all of them are different. Okay, so don't think that, we'll try and that they'll try and be shady and, put in a financial advisor and then the mutual fund distributor both as different. It's not that. Okay, so you've got like a real estate person, you've got a financial advisor, you have got a mixologist or a bartender, you've got online yoga, you've got
organic farming,
so
you've got, lots of stuff there.
We've just covered 6 or 7 maybe out here in our conversation, but the report is there. Do download it and have a look at it. Chalo, okay. Ajit, now that all this, the cooler part and the fun part is over, let's get back to slightly more dreary
Sure.
topics. It's not dreary because, man, it looks like anyone can make money these days in the markets.
Yeah.
But your thoughts, and you know what? First start with that general view, equity, debt or whatever. And I'll come to the second question because last time when you were here in December 2023, we ended the recording with how to choose a mutual fund. That became a fan favorite because it kind of circulated a lot. People really liked it for whatever reason. And that was like December 2023.
Right.
Here we are now, this will probably be out in October of this year, almost a year later. So I want you to revisit that, okay, and tell us about that. But let's just get this, whatever, kya lagta hai market or whatever, out of the way.
Very tough one, actually, Anupam, because, for many of us who've been in the financial investment careers for as long as we've been, I've been in mutual funds for now more than 25 years. The last year and a half has been exceptional. And exceptional because we are seeing a lot of retail individuals directly participating into the equity markets and also with mutual funds, as we see numbers for SIPs going up and the general flow into mutual funds going up. But clearly post-COVID, there is this sense probably that I want to make money fast. I want to get to that point fast. And therefore, I think people are largely leaving maybe fundamental analysis and things aside and saying, let's just go with the herd. And the herd mentality currently seems to be that wherever there's a story, let's go with the story. And as fund managers, we sort of have, as PGIM, for instance, amongst all the different styles of investing, we are more biased towards the growth style of investing because India is a country for growth. Yes. And within that growth, we sort of look for quality, which means we are looking for companies which have above average growth in their return on equities and their sales growth and things like that. We just feel that these are companies that can better help protect downside and therefore give you consistent returns over the longer term. However, these companies are currently not performing as well as other parts of the market over the last 1 or 2 years, which have sort of gone out of proportion because of what I said, the narratives and the stories that have been built around them. So just to give you a little bit of a statistics here, probably, Anupam, that, when PGIM started this journey way back in 2020, from 2019, and when I look at 2020 during the pandemic, the lockdown years, there were about 31 million PAN cards, and you use that as a proxy of saying that these people can invest into the markets. Not that all of them maybe, but that's the number. In March 2024, it's crossed 100 million.
From 31?
From 31.
In 4 years?
In 4 years.
Wow.
In 2021, that 31 million had gone to about 40 million. 40 million in 21 to 100 million in 24.
3 years double.
In 3 years. So in the 100 million, right, from 40 to 100, 60% of the people, and most of them also probably participating in the markets, haven't seen equity markets before 2021.
Yeah.
So the euphoria is, well, I put money in the market, it'll make money. But I think that, at the simplest level, I would probably say, what I would say to anybody is that your first rule is don't lose money and do as much downside protection to your portfolios as possible. Don't concentrate all your money in 1 or 2 sectors or segments. Be as diversified as you can. And here comes the selection of mutual funds, and what I would probably recommend is that when we say diversification, it's not about owning 7 or 10 funds or 15 or 20 stocks, because many a time you might end up looking only at one metric, which is performance, which is something to look for. But if you're going after all that are performing today, it's very likely that a single style is working well, and so you're concentrating in the style. So the way that we would recommend is that there are 3 or 4 styles of investing. There are fund managers who would look for, like us, look for high quality companies. And in growth, there are companies. There are fund managers who may look for momentum factors in the market. There are fund managers who would look for value, anything that is cheap, and they would want to buy that and build a portfolio. And there are things in between that. At the bare minimum, I would say that the simplest thing is to ask a few questions and do a little research of saying, if I am putting money into 3, 4, or 5 funds, am I diversified across styles of investing? Because everything is cyclical, as you mentioned. And sometimes one style is predominant and the other style is out of favor. But please look at that out of favor as being available at a discount. And when you use that as a framework, you want to be everywhere. You just don't want to be always chasing what's performing, because equities will do well generally over the long term. Mix up the different styles you have, and you're likely to do much better. You're likely to have much better downside protection. Philosophically, I would say that the key is don't be concentrated, though concentration creates the maximum wealth. So it's such key. You look at an Elon Musk, or you look at a Bill Gates. All wealth, huge wealth, gets done when you're concentrated, and all of that for them is tied up in one stock. But for the common person, that's where diversification comes in, right? You make money with the skills of others, but diversification is across styles, according to me. And the mantra that you should adopt is, in any which way, am I getting concentrated? Am I getting concentrated in one style? And even though I'm owning 10 funds, am I getting concentrated in one skill in my life from which I'm earning money? Those are the kind of things. Other than your spouse, which I think should be one. Be one, maybe. Everything else needs to be a little diversified.
So let's look at someone, who's watching this show and who's never invested in mutual funds, is considering investing in mutual funds right now. Obviously, he doesn't have any concentration or diversification, or hopefully he's sorted on his asset allocation. And let's just stick to equities. What would you tell him or her in terms of how to choose a mutual fund to start his investment journey?
When it is about starting an investment journey, so I'm going to use the recommendation of having a trusted financial advisor as a base. It's a foundation, I think, for a lot. Not to say that people can't do it on their own, and there's a lot amongst the young generation in the DIY stage where they would love to do it on their own. So for those who are starting, I think that what I would advise is to simply think about time frame. What is the time frame that they're thinking of when they're putting their money to work? Is it just that they want to upgrade their mobile phone every second year, let's say? Is it that they want to buy a house, or most people may not want to buy a house or own a car these days, but is it that they want to start a business 10 years from now, right? A startup of their own that they want to do. Is it that they want to backpack and roam the world when they're 35? What is it? What's that time frame? And then many of them are getting settled. So when are their kids going to get into education? When are they going to stop work and think of doing something as their passion gig for the future? Things like that. Once you get your time frames aligned, equity works best for the longest of the time frames. Anything, I would say, which is 5 years and above is good for 100% equity allocation, so to speak. Within that, you can decide with your advisor or without your advisor. I would prefer with your advisor how diversified or concentrated or themes or whatever it is that you want to do. It is really when you're thinking about time frames below the 5 years and then thinking about investing into equity that I think that you should apply a little bit more caution. Because your time frames, if they're shorter than 5 years, I would probably say that better bets are to go for blue chip portfolios, the large companies that don't get very volatile. Even better would be go for multi-asset portfolios and hybrid portfolios that the mutual fund world today offers. So if you're getting this auto asset allocation within your funds, or you're going for hybrid funds which are not 100% equity funds, you're in a very safe zone, and you will still make I would say a decent return compared to leaving that money in a bank, which should be your frame of reference. So the first aspect is time frame.
Time, always.
The second aspect is, what are you using as your benchmark for comparing your performance? Are you using your neighbor as your benchmark? Are you using your friend's fund as the benchmark, or stock as the benchmark? Or you're using the fact that if I didn't do anything, this money would be in the bank. What would I get in the bank? That could be your benchmark. For many people, it would be, if the market, the index is doing something, then that's my benchmark. Choose it wisely. Because most often, if you're choosing the benchmark as saying, well, I think the equity market in the last 2 years has done 50% and that's my benchmark, keeping that expectation for the future can lead you down the wrong path. So I think choosing the benchmark. So you get your time frame right,
Yep.
choose your benchmark, and then even if you're doing it yourself, you use your hybrid funds for things in below the 5 years and more equity funds beyond the 5 years. Mix up the styles. Don't think something is bad or good just by looking at the face of it. And final underlying, get a good trusted financial advisor
always,
who's qualified, who's certified to help you along the journey. That would be even better.
Folks, that's as comprehensive as it can get. So don't just go on performance. There's an entire framework that Ajit has just mentioned, and you can just rewind this and hear it all over again. Ajit, we are done. Last time when you were here, you had like 2 book recommendations. Okay, you gave Spoon Fed.
Oh yeah, Tim Spector.
Tim Spector, Spoon Fed, and you gave Red Fear.
That's true.
Okay, which is the book on China. I've forgotten the authors, but those are the 2 books that you had done then. What are you reading these days? Anything for our...
a heavy book, but then I'm loving it. The Future is Faster Than You Think.
Wow.
It's a book by Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler. They've written
The
this
Kotler?
together. Yes, the Kotler. And, it's a book about how, when we think about AI, when we think about disruption, I think it's a third in a series that they've written Abundance, and they've written others. But The Future is Faster Than You Think is a book where I find them explaining about how converging technologies actually lead to disruption in various fields. Many of us think that AI alone can cause a lot of disruption, right? And I guess having gigs makes sense in an AI world as well, for sure. There are more gigs that you can probably do with the help of AI. But it's when AI and quantum computing and 3D printing starts converging that certain industries could get completely disrupted. So it's very interesting to see their sort of thesis around how converging technologies, most of the time 3 technologies converging, can actually disrupt things. I was reading recently about Agnikul Cosmos, which is a space startup at IIT Madras.
Okay.
They are the first ones in the world to 3D print the entire rocket engine that puts satellites into low orbit, and they launched from Sriharikota
I had no idea
recently.
about this,
And Srinath and Moin and team over there, along with the professors of IIT Madras.
Sure.
They could print the engine, 3D print the engine in 72 hours. They can do it in 72 hours is what they say.
Crazy.
So for people who want to put satellites for their jobs into low orbit, you have an Indian startup that's 3D printing it.
Yeah.
So where's supply chain in all of this, right? So I think these kind of technologies, as they converge, there's an exciting time ahead for all of us.
So folks, there's your book recommendation, and that is it. That is a wrap on this episode of Paisa Vaisa. My returning guest, Ajit Menon, CEO, PGIM India Mutual Fund. As always, the Renew, Recharge, Never Retire report link is given in the episode description. Do check it out. Ajit, always great to have you in the studio. Thank you so much for doing this for our listeners.
Thank you. I enjoyed myself. Thank you.
Thank you.